I still remember the exact moment when reality began to unravel. Not the dramatic kind, no thunderous explosions or reality-bending special effects. Just the quiet horror of watching Commander Neandervalis stare at his own reflection in the ship's viewport, muttering fragments of a conversation none of us were part of. "That's not my face," he whispered, fingers trembling against the reinforced glass. That's not my reflection. "I'm Dr. Marcus Pierce, mission specialist for NASA's Erebus 9 expedition. Theoretical physicist by training, though these days that title feels more like a cruel joke than a credential. What good is understanding quantum mechanics when reality itself refuses to play by the rules? Back on Earth, I was known for my controversial papers on quantum consciousness and its potential role in space-time manipulation. My colleagues called me brilliant, but unstable. Now I wonder if they saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, a predisposition to accepting the impossible. The year is 2135, or at least it was when we left Earth. Time has become fluid since then. Our mission seemed straightforward. Investigate anomalous signals from a planet orbiting a red dwarf in the Hydra system. Signals that hinted at intelligent life, or at least the remnants of it. The kind of mission that ends careers if you're wrong and makes history if you're right. Commander Vallis, Ned to his friends, though he insisted on formality, was a career astronaut with more deep space missions under his belt than the rest of us combined. Built like a retired linebacker gone slightly to seed, with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard that made him look more like a philosophy professor than a spaceman. The kind of leader who memorized not just your service record, but your kids' birthdays too. He had a habit of humming old Beatles songs during pre-flight checks, though he'd deny it if you called him out on it. I remember our first real conversation during the 6-month training period before launch. We were in the centrifuge facility, recovering from another brutal high-G simulation. "You know what scares me most about deep space, Pierce?" he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not the vacuum, not the radiation. It's the possibility that we'll find exactly what we're looking for." I didn't understand what he meant then. I do now. Dr. James Harrison, our xenobiologist, was the youngest of our crew, fresh out of MIT's xenoscience program, still carrying that wide-faced enthusiasm of someone who hadn't yet learned that space mostly wants to kill you. Always tapping away at his tablet, recording observations about the most mundane details of our journey. He had this peculiar habit of talking to his samples as if they were pets, giving them names and backstories. "Every living thing has a story," he'd say when we teased him about it. "Even if it's just a single-celled organism, it's part of a billion-year narrative of survival and adaptation. How can you not be excited about that?" Rounding out our crew was Technical Officer David Wong, our engineer and resident cynic. A man who treated the ship's systems like temperamental children that needed constant attention and stern lectures. He'd been on 3 previous deep space missions, and according to him, each one was worse than the last. Wong had a doctorate in mechanical engineering from Stanford, but he preferred to be called the guy who keeps the lights on. His quarters were filled with old paperback science fiction novels, the pessimistic kind that predicted humanity's doom. "You know what the problem with space exploration is?" he'd often say during our meal breaks, pushing his food around his plate with mathematical precision. "Too many romantics. Everyone wants to find aliens or ancient civilizations. Nobody wants to admit we're probably alone out here. And maybe that's for the best. If only he'd been right. The journey to Erebus 9 took 18 months, most of it spent in cryosleep. I remember the dreams I had during that time. Strange, fragmentary things that seemed to leak between the edges of consciousness. Dreams of standing in vast, empty spaces, feeling watched by something I couldn't see. At the time, I attributed it to the known side effects of long-term cryosleep. Now I wonder if something else was already reaching out to us, across the vast distances of space. The descent to Erebus 9's surface was textbook perfect, though looking back, I realized that should have been our first warning. Nothing in deep space exploration ever goes exactly according to plan. The planet itself seemed underwhelming at first. Mostly barren rock with patches of hardy vegetation that looked like someone had taken Earth's desert plants and painted them in shades of deep purple. The atmosphere was breathable but thin, giving everything a perpetual twilight feel under the red dwarf's dim light. Harrison spent hours analysing the atmospheric composition, growing increasingly excited about the implications of finding Earth-like conditions so far from home. "Do you realise what this means?" he kept saying. "The chances of this happening naturally are astronomical. Someone engineered this planet." Wong just rolled his eyes and continued running diagnostics on our landing gear. "Or maybe we just got lucky. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, kid." We set up our research outpost about 2 kilometers from where the signal originated. Standard prefab units, nothing fancy. Harrison spent the first day collecting soil samples and practically bouncing off the walls with excitement over the alien microorganisms he found. Even Wong seemed impressed by the sophistication of the life forms we were discovering. Then Wong saw it first during his morning systems check. I remember the exact moment, 07:43 local time. The pale red sun was barely cresting the horizon, casting long shadows across the purple-tinted landscape. I was analysing some atmospheric data when his voice crackled over the comm, unusually tight with tension. "Hey, Doc," he called, the usual sarcasm in his voice replaced by something I'd never heard from him before. Fear. "Come take a look at this. Either I'm hallucinating or there's something out there that definitely wasn't there yesterday." I stepped out of the main module, adjusting my environment suit against the thin, cold air. The mist that perpetually shrouded the valley was thicker than usual that morning, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost meaningful. That should have been my first warning, the way the fog moved against the wind, as if being pulled towards something. Then I saw it. I've spent 20 years studying quantum mechanics, trying to understand the fundamental nature of reality. I've written papers on string theory, multiple dimensions, and the observer effect. None of that prepared me for what I saw looming through that alien mist. The Colossus defied every natural law we knew. It stood impossibly tall, its head almost lost in the low clouds, its surface a nightmare hybrid of stone and organic matter. From certain angles it looked like weathered granite, ancient and unchanging. But then you'd shift your perspective slightly, and suddenly you'd see what looked like muscles, sinews, and vast networks of vein-like structures pulsing beneath the stone surface. The proportions were wrong in a way that hurt to look at. Its arms seemed too long, then too short, depending on how you measured them. The head appeared to be facing away from us, yet somehow I knew it was watching. The whole thing existed in a state of visual contradiction, a quantum uncertainty made manifest on a massive scale. "Jesus Christ," Wong whispered, coming to stand beside me. He'd been running diagnostics on the perimeter sensors when he first spotted it. His tablet was still clutched in his shaking hands, displaying readings that made no sense. Massive energy spikes followed by absolute zeros, gravitational anomalies that changed every time he took a new measurement. Harrison emerged from his lab module, his excitement over the morning's microorganism findings forgotten. "That's impossible," he whispered, his tablet slipping from nerveless fingers to clatter on the rocky ground. "We did multiple orbital surveys, something that size would have shown up on our scans. The gravitational impact alone, it should have torn the planet apart." I found myself moving forward, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The surface of the Colossus seemed to ripple as I approached, like heat waves off hot pavement. But the air was cold, barely above freezing. "Dr. Pierce," Commander Vallis's voice crackled over the comm. "Stay where you are, that's an order." I stopped, suddenly aware I'd walked almost 50 meters toward the thing without realizing it. Wong grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Maybe it's some kind of projection," he suggested, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. Gone was his usual skepticism, replaced by something approaching awe. "A hologram or—" "Generated by what?" I asked, gesturing at our sensor readings. "There's no power source, no emission signature. By every measurable metric, it shouldn't exist. Look at these quantum fluctuation readings. They're off the scale. It's like the thing exists in multiple states simultaneously." The colossus stood there, utterly still yet somehow flowing like liquid stone. The more I tried to focus on any specific detail, the more it seemed to shift and change. It was like trying to remember the details of a dream while still dreaming. The moment you tried to pin down any particular aspect, it would transform into something else. Commander Vallis called an immediate team meeting in the main module. I noticed his hands trembling as he pulled up the orbital survey data on the main screen, though he tried to hide it by keeping them clasped behind his back. 20 years of NASA training couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. The module felt too small suddenly, too fragile. Its walls of reinforced plasteel seemed tissue paper thin against the impossible mass looming outside. The readings on Wong's tablet kept changing, each new scan showing different results, as if the Colossus was constantly rewriting its own physical properties. "All right, people," Vallis said, pacing the length of our small common area. His footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was coming from multiple directions at once. "Let's approach this methodically. Dr. Pierce, any theories about how we might have missed this during our initial survey?" I shook my head, trying to organize my thoughts. The equations and theories I'd built my career on seemed inadequate in the face of what we'd found. "None of that makes sense, Commander. The mass alone should have affected our gravitational readings, unless what? Unless it wasn't there to be detected, or unless it exists in a state of quantum superposition, only collapsing into definite form when observed." I pulled up my own readings on the main screen. "Look at these quantum signatures. They're unlike anything we've ever recorded. It's as if the object exists in all possible states simultaneously, only settling into our reality when we perceive it." Wong snorted, but the sound held more hysteria than humor. "Great. So now we're dealing with quantum giant statues that pop in and out of existence. Should we ask it if it's friends with Schrödinger's cat?" He tried to laugh, but it came out as more of a sob. But something was already happening to us, though we didn't recognize it at first. Small things. Harrison would stop mid-sentence, looking confused, then continue speaking about something entirely different. Wong started having conversations with people who weren't there, and I began to remember things that hadn't happened yet. I would find myself completing other crew members' sentences before they spoke them, only to have them insist they were about to say something completely different. Time became slippery, unreliable. We'd check the chronometers and find them displaying impossible readings, dates from centuries ago alongside moments that hadn't happened yet. The dream started 3 days after we discovered the Colossus. I found myself walking through endless corridors made of the same stone flesh material as the statue, hearing whispered conversations in languages I didn't understand but somehow knew the meaning of. In one recurring sequence, I stood before a vast control panel made of pulsing, organic crystals, while thousands of voices spoke in perfect unison. "The dreamer must not wake. The dreamer must not wake. The dreamer must not wake." During one of our morning briefings, I noticed Commander Vallis writing in his log. Nothing unusual about that, except he was writing with his left hand. Ned was right-handed, had been all his life. When I pointed this out, he stared at his hand as if seeing it for the first time. I don't understand," he said slowly. "I've always been left-handed, haven't I?" Wong leaned forward, his face pale. "Commander, yesterday you told me you broke your left arm in high school and never regained full dexterity. That's why you learned to do everything right-handed." "Did I?" Vallis looked genuinely confused. I remember both things. Both memories feel real." That's when Harrison disappeared. One moment he was taking readings near the base of the Colossus, and the next, nothing. No warning, no dramatic special effects. Just gone, leaving his tablet lying in the purple dust. The last entry in his notes read, "I can hear it thinking. It's so beautiful, so vast. How did we ever think we were all..." That night we all had the same dream. Harrison was there, but not there. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking words that made perfect sense in the dream but turned to nonsense when we tried to remember them after waking. The only phrase that stayed with me was, It's not watching us. We're watching through it. The dreams are real, Wong insisted during breakfast. More real than this, haven't you noticed? The food doesn't taste like anything anymore. And look, he held up his coffee mug. The steam rises but never dissipates. It's like we're in a memory of breakfast rather than actually eating it. I watched the steam from his cup rising in perfect spirals that indeed never faded. Had it always done that? I couldn't remember anymore. When I tried to focus on my own memories of previous meals, they seemed to shift and change, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. Commander Vallis ordered us to maintain our distance from the Colossus, but it didn't matter. Reality continued to fray around the edges. Time became unreliable. I'd check my watch and find it showing 3 different times simultaneously. Wong swore he could remember the future, while Vallis seemed to be living the same hour over and over, unaware that he was repeating himself. I found Vallis in the communications module one morning, sending the same message to Mission Control over and over. Each time he'd finish, forget he'd sent it, and start again. The timestamp on each transmission was impossible. Some dated centuries into the future, others predating the invention of radio. "We have to tell them," he kept saying, "have to warn them, but the words keep changing after I send them." He was right. I watched the message text morph and shift on the screen, English letters flowing into alien symbols and back again. One version warned of impending doom, another was a cheerful status report, and a third seemed to be a love letter to someone none of us had ever met. Then came the day when Wong figured it out, or maybe he always knew and only now remembered that he knew. Time had become so twisted that cause and effect no longer followed any logical order. I found him in the engineering bay, surrounded by dismantled equipment, tears streaming down his face. "It's not a statue," he said, his eyes wide with a terrible understanding. "It's a trap, a lure. Think about it. Why would any civilization build something like this and then vanish? They didn't vanish. They're still here. In there." He pointed at the Colossus. "They uploaded themselves into it. And now it's doing the same to us." I looked down at my hands and noticed for the first time that my skin had taken on a greyish tint, like stone catching the light. Had it always been that colour? Commander Vallis was writing in his log again, but now both his hands were moving, keeping separate journals simultaneously. When I looked over his shoulder, I saw that one journal was written in perfect mirror script. "Look at this," Wong said, pulling up sensor data on his tablet. "These energy readings, they're not coming from the Colossus, they're coming from us, our brains, our consciousness. It's feeding on us, converting us." "Converting us into what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Into itself, into memory, into dream." Wong's voice had taken on a strange echo, as if multiple versions of him were speaking slightly out of sync. "We're not exploring Erebus 9, we're being digested by it. The evidence was everywhere once we knew what to look for. Our supplies never seemed to run out, yet we never received any resupply missions. The sun never moved in the sky, yet we experienced what felt like days and nights. And our communications with Earth. When was the last time we'd actually received a response?" "We have to wake up," Wong insisted. "This isn't real. None of this is real. We're dreaming, all of us right now. We never landed on Erebus 9. We never left Earth. He vanished mid-sentence, just like Harrison. But this time we could still hear him thinking. His thoughts leaked into ours, a cascade of memories and fears and revelations. I saw his childhood in San Francisco, his first kiss, the day his father died, the moment he decided to become an engineer, all mixed with memories that couldn't be his, memories of alien worlds and ancient civilizations and the birth of stars. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The Colossus wasn't just alive, it was ancient beyond comprehension, a dreaming god that fed on consciousness itself, and it only woke when others dreamed of it. It was a psychic parasite that had evolved beyond physical form, spreading itself across the galaxy by infiltrating the dreams of other species. How many civilizations had it absorbed this way? How many explorers had stumbled upon it, only to be drawn into its endless dream. I could hear them now, their voices echoing in the spaces between thoughts, countless beings from across the galaxy, all trapped in the same eternal moment of discovery and horror. We found Harrison's research logs, or what was left of them. The last entries were fragmented, corrupted, but one passage stood out. The microorganisms in the soil, they're not native to this planet. They're memories of life from other worlds. The entire ecosystem is a recreation, a dream of life assembled from the absorbed consciousness of countless civilizations. Even the atmosphere, we're not breathing air, we're breathing remembered air. Commander Vallis was the last to understand. I watched as realization dawned in his eyes, all three of them now, though I couldn't remember when the third had appeared. "We never left Earth," he whispered, his voice resonating with the voices of 1,000 other commanders who had come to the same revelation. "We're still there in our pods, dreaming. All of us. Always dreaming. The mission, the launch, the long journey through space. All of it was the Colossus, reaching across light years to pull us into its dream before we even left Earth. We were never meant to find it. It had already found us, perhaps centuries ago, when the first human looked up at the stars and dreamed of what might be out there. I looked up at the Colossus one last time as my consciousness began to fragment. Its head had turned, impossible given its stone nature, yet I was certain it hadn't moved at all. It had always been looking at us, from the beginning of time to its end. As reality finally dissolved completely, I heard Harrison's voice one last time, clearer than ever. "Do you know the worst part? Somewhere out there, in the real world, they're still sending ships to Erebus 9, still picking up our signal, still coming to rescue us. And they're all still dreaming," Wong's thoughts added, now indistinguishable from the collective consciousness we were becoming part of. "They always were," Commander Vallis's voice echoed, now just another thread in the tapestry of shared memory. "I try to wake up sometimes, in the endless now that we inhabit. We all do. But that's the true horror of it all. We're not asleep. We're not dreaming. We're just another memory in the mind of a dreaming god, endlessly reliving the moment of our own dissolution. And somewhere, in what we once called reality, another ship is picking up our signal. Another crew is preparing for rescue. Another team is dreaming of the Colossus. And the cycle continues, as it always has, as it always will. Because that's the thing about dreams. You never know you're in one until you wake up. And we can never wake up, because we were never really here at all." I think I understand now what Commander Vallis meant about finding exactly what we were looking for. In our quest to find intelligence among the stars, we never considered that it might find us first. That it might have always been finding us, drawing us forward through history with an irresistible call to explore, to discover, to dream. And now, in the infinite spaces between moments, I sometimes wonder when humanity first looked up at the stars and felt that inexplicable longing to reach them. Was that us? Or was it the Colossus, dreaming through us, calling us home?